The black maid was falsely accused of theft until the Mafia boss opened the security footage. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was just another evening at one of the most exclusive restaurants in downtown Chicago. The soft glow of crystal chandeliers reflected off polished marble floors, and the air was thick with the hum of wealthy patrons enjoying their lavish meals. In the corner, behind the bar, stood a young woman with a nervous expression. Her name was Michelle, and she worked as a maid at the upscale restaurant. Michelle was well known by the staff, but not for her own merits. She was known for being quiet, humble, and hardworking. But tonight, everything was about to change. The night began like any other, with Michelle carrying a tray of glasses to one of the tables. Her uniform was spotless, her posture perfect as she moved between the tables, trying not to draw attention to herself. But as she approached table 6, she caught the eye of one of the guests, a man in a tailored suit, with a cold stare that immediately made her feel uncomfortable. "Excuse me," he called, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "You've got something that belongs to me." Michelle froze in place, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what he was talking about. She had never seen him before, nor had she interacted with any of the guests at this particular table. The man continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "Don't play dumb. You're the one who took my wallet, aren't you?" Michelle's face turned pale as she realized what he was accusing her of. She shook her head furiously, her voice shaking as she tried to explain. "I didn't take anything, sir. I swear." But her words fell on deaf ears. The man stood up abruptly, pointing his finger at her. "I want the security footage," he snapped. "You'll pay for this." The room fell silent as the other guests watched the scene unfold. Michelle's heart sank. She had never felt so humiliated in her life. She had worked so hard to build a good reputation in the restaurant, but now it seemed like all of that was about to be shattered. A few moments later, the restaurant manager arrived, flanked by 2 security guards. The man's accusations were loud and clear, and Michelle was ordered to go with them. As she was escorted to the back office, her mind raced. She couldn't believe this was happening. How could someone so quickly jump to such a conclusion? Her mind was spinning with the fear of losing her job, the fear of being falsely accused of something she didn't do. As the manager opened the office door, he looked at Michelle with a stern expression. "We'll need to review the security footage, Michelle," he said coldly. "You'll have to wait here." Michelle nodded, her eyes downcast. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. What if the footage really showed her taking something? What if she was caught in the act? What would she do then? The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Michelle sat in silence, her heart racing as the manager and security guards watched the footage. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but from the looks on their faces, she could tell that something was unfolding. And then, it happened. The door opened, and in walked the man who had accused her. But this time, there was someone else with him. A man who exuded power and authority, a man whose presence seemed to command the room. It was Vincent Romano, the Mafia boss. He had been dining in the restaurant that evening and had witnessed the entire scene from afar. His dark eyes scanned the room before landing on Michelle. "What's going on here?" he asked in a voice that sent shivers down Michelle's spine. The manager stammered, trying to explain the situation, but Vincent wasn't interested in the excuses. He turned to the security guard. "Show me the footage," he ordered. The footage played on the screen, and as the camera zoomed in on Michelle, the tension in the room grew thick. But as the video continued, something incredible happened. It showed Michelle, not stealing anything, but actually picking up a wallet that had been dropped by another guest. She was simply returning it to the lost and found, trying to do the right thing. The Mafia boss's gaze softened as he watched the footage, and the room was silent. The man who had accused Michelle of theft stood there, his face turning red with embarrassment. "It's clear she didn't take anything," Vincent said, his voice calm but firm. "I'll take care of this." The man stuttered, trying to defend himself, but Vincent cut him off. "You owe this woman an apology," he said, "and I think you'll be leaving this place shortly." Michelle stood there, still in shock, as Vincent turned to the manager. She's not going anywhere, he added. She's not only staying here, but she's getting a raise. Michelle blinked, not sure she heard him correctly. The Mafia boss had just protected her, saved her from a life-changing accusation. And as the man who had accused her of theft was escorted out of the restaurant, Michelle realized that sometimes justice really does come from the most unexpected places. The next few days passed in a blur for Michelle. She couldn't believe what had happened at the restaurant, how everything had turned so quickly in her favor. She was back to her usual duties, but the weight of the events still hung heavily over her. It was hard to shake the image of Vincent Romano's face as he stood up for her, his words commanding the room, his protection a shield she hadn't even known she needed. She couldn't help but replay the moment over and over again in her mind, as if she were waiting for it to be taken away. Vincent had made sure to leave a lasting impression on her. After the confrontation, he had made it clear that not only was Michelle staying at the restaurant, but she would also be getting a significant raise. She was grateful, but at the same time, her curiosity about Vincent had grown. Who was he really? Why had he stepped in to defend her so forcefully? And what did it mean for her now? The next time she saw him, it was as if nothing had changed, yet everything had. Michelle was cleaning up a table near the back of the restaurant when she noticed Vincent seated at his usual spot in the VIP section, but this time, something felt different. His presence was still commanding, but there was a subtle shift in the way he looked at her, a new layer of recognition. It wasn't just the Mafia boss looking at the quiet maid anymore. There was something more. As she made her way past his table, he caught her eye. "Michelle," he called softly, his voice steady, almost reassuring. She stopped in her tracks, not sure what to expect. She had been trying to keep a low profile, not wanting to draw any more attention to herself after the incident. But now, there was no hiding. Vincent motioned for her to come closer. "Come here for a second," he said. She approached hesitantly, her heart pounding in her chest. As she stood before him, she noticed the small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice warm, but with an edge of something she couldn't quite place. "For what?" Michelle asked, genuinely confused. "For what you did that night. For stepping up and doing the right thing." His eyes locked onto hers, and she could see the sincerity in them. "You could have just stood there, but you didn't. That's rare." Michelle didn't know what to say. She had never thought of it as anything special. It was just the right thing to do. "It's just part of the job," she replied, trying to brush it off. "Not always," Vincent said, his tone shifting slightly. "You didn't just follow the rules. You made a choice. That's what sets you apart." Michelle blinked, feeling a little overwhelmed. She had always kept to herself, never wanting to get involved in anything beyond her work. But here, in front of this powerful man, she was suddenly being acknowledged, recognized for something she had never thought of as extraordinary. "I appreciate what you did," Vincent continued, leaning back in his chair. "And I think you deserve more than just a raise." Michelle's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, suddenly feeling the gravity of his words. Vincent's gaze softened slightly. "I mean, I want you to work directly with me." The words hung in the air, and Michelle felt her mind race. Work with him? What could he possibly want with someone like her? "I've been looking for someone trustworthy to help with some personal matters," Vincent said, his voice low and measured. "I think you're the right person for the job." Michelle's mind was spinning. She had never been involved in anything shady, let alone in the world of organized crime. She had no idea what kind of personal matters he was talking about, but the idea of working directly with Vincent Romano was both thrilling and terrifying. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of work are you talking about?" Vincent leaned forward, his dark eyes fixed on hers. "I need someone who can handle certain tasks with discretion, someone who won't ask questions or get involved in things they don't need to know. I've seen how you carry yourself. You're exactly what I'm looking for." Michelle's heart was racing now. She had always known that working for Vincent Romano meant being close to danger, but she had never imagined it would come to this. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that," she said, her voice shaky. Vincent didn't seem fazed by her hesitation. Instead, he smiled again, the expression soft but knowing. "You're more capable than you think, Michelle. I'll give you time to think about it. Just know that the offer is there. You can walk away, or you can step into a new role, a new world." The weight of his words lingered in the air, and Michelle felt the full force of the decision she now had to make. She had always played it safe, always kept her head down. But now, standing before Vincent Romano, she was at a crossroads. Could she continue to live her life as it was? Or would this opportunity open the door to something much bigger, something far more dangerous? She didn't know the answer, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life had already changed, and she couldn't go back. Michelle spent the next few days in a haze, trying to process what Vincent had said. She was still at the restaurant, doing her usual work, but now every moment felt different. The offer he had made, working directly with him, was hanging over her like a cloud she couldn't escape. She had never been someone to take risks, never someone who liked to stand out, but now she was being pulled into something much bigger than herself, something dangerous. She had avoided the Mafia world her entire life, always choosing to stay out of trouble, to stay invisible. But the more she thought about Vincent, the more her doubts grew. He was powerful, yes, but there was something else about him, something that intrigued her. It wasn't just the money, the luxury, or even the power. It was the way he made her feel, like she mattered, like she wasn't just another invisible face in the crowd. It was something she hadn't felt in years. And she couldn't deny that the idea of working for him stirred something inside her. The more she tried to dismiss the thought, the more it lingered, creeping into her mind every time she was alone. But there was one thing she couldn't ignore. Her life was at a crossroads. She had always played it safe, never stepping outside the lines. She had always kept her head down, doing what was asked of her, never asking for more. But now, with Vincent's offer on the table, she had a choice to make. Would she continue on the path she had always known, or would she take a leap into the unknown? The decision weighed heavily on her mind as the days passed. She couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop replaying the conversation in her head. She wanted to believe that she was capable of more, that she wasn't just a maid in a restaurant. But the fear of what it would mean, the fear of what would come next, was almost too much to bear. It wasn't just the idea of working for Vincent that scared her, it was the life that came with it. The danger, the uncertainty, the unknown. She had seen what the Mafia was capable of, and she didn't know if she could handle it. And yet, a small part of her, a part that she had long buried, wanted to take the risk, wanted to step into a world where she wasn't invisible, where she wasn't just a maid, a face that people forgot as soon as she walked out of the room. As she stood in the break room one afternoon, wiping down the counter, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone ringing. It was Vincent. Her heart skipped a beat as she hesitated for a moment before answering. Michelle, Vincent's voice came through, calm and steady. I've been thinking about our conversation. Have you made a decision? The question hung in the air, and Michelle felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had promised herself that she would take her time, think things through. But now, with Vincent's voice on the other end of the line, she felt the pressure building. She couldn't ignore the feeling in her chest any longer. This was her chance. Her chance to be more than just a maid, more than just a nobody. I'm ready, she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. I'll do it. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low chuckle from Vincent. I knew you would, he said, his tone soft but filled with approval. Meet me tomorrow at the office. I'll give you all the details then. Michelle felt a mixture of excitement and fear flood her. She had made her choice. There was no turning back now. The next day, she found herself walking into a building she had never seen before, her heart pounding in her chest. The sleek glass doors opened, and she stepped into a modern lobby, the walls adorned with expensive artwork and marble floors that reflected the soft light overhead. As she walked toward the elevator, she felt a sense of both awe and terror. This was a world she had never imagined herself in. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, she was greeted by Vincent himself. He stood there, looking every bit the powerful man she had imagined, his tailored suit fitting him perfectly. His dark eyes softened as he saw her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something other than the cold, calculating Mafia boss. Welcome to my world, Michelle, he said, his voice smooth but not without a hint of something more personal. Are you ready? Michelle nodded, her hands trembling slightly. I think so. Vincent led her into a large office, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city below. The space was immaculate, with modern furniture and sleek decor. It was a world of wealth and power, a world that felt so far removed from her own humble existence. This is where you'll be working, Vincent said, gesturing to the desk in the corner. "You'll be handling matters that require discretion, things that most people wouldn't even dream of. But I trust you." Michelle couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had never been trusted with anything this important, this dangerous. And yet, here she was, standing in the heart of the Mafia world, ready to begin a new chapter of her life. She had made her choice, and now there was no going back. As Vincent handed her a file, Michelle couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation mixed with fear. She didn't know exactly what she was getting herself into, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life had changed forever. Michelle sat at the sleek, modern desk in Vincent's office, the file he handed her sitting untouched in front of her. The weight of the situation pressed down on her shoulders as she looked around the space. The city skyline outside the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed like another world, one she could hardly imagine herself being a part of. Her hands shook slightly as she opened the file, unsure of what exactly she was about to get into. Inside were documents she had no experience with, contracts, names she didn't recognize, and coded language that made her feel more out of place than ever. Vincent had given her the task, and now it was up to her to figure it out. She wasn't sure if she could handle this kind of work, but as she looked up at Vincent, who stood by the window watching her, something inside her told her she had to try. She couldn't back down now. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was something more. The silence between them felt thick, and Michelle could feel the tension building in the room. She opened the first document and started reading, her mind racing to keep up with the complicated terms and codes. It was a world of business dealings, alliances, and threats, a far cry from the simple life she had left behind. She wasn't sure if she could understand all of this, but Vincent had trusted her, and that meant something. As she worked through the documents, Vincent finally spoke. "You're doing well, Michelle. But remember, discretion is key in this world. You'll be handling sensitive information, things that could make or break people's lives. You need to stay sharp." His words sent a chill down her spine. He wasn't just talking about paperwork. There was an edge to his tone, a reminder of the dangerous world she was now a part of. "I'll be careful," she replied, her voice steady even though she didn't feel that way inside. The weight of the responsibility was immense, but it also gave her a sense of power she had never felt before. For the first time, she wasn't just a bystander in her own life. She was involved in something much bigger. The day stretched on as she worked through the files, Vincent occasionally offering guidance. He seemed to watch her closely, his presence always just behind her, like a shadow. She could feel the intensity of his gaze on her, and every time she glanced up, he was there, watching her carefully. It was as if he was evaluating her every move, every decision she made. It was both thrilling and terrifying. As the day came to a close, Vincent stood and walked over to her, placing a hand on the back of her chair. "You're doing well. But there's one more thing I need to tell you." Michelle looked up at him, feeling her heart race. "What's that?" "This job," Vincent began, his voice quieter now, "isn't just about the work. It's about loyalty. You're going to be a part of something bigger than yourself. And I need to know that I can trust you. There's no room for mistakes in this world. You understand that, right?" Michelle nodded, trying to steady her breathing. She understood, but it still felt overwhelming. Trust. Loyalty. The words weighed on her more than she expected. It wasn't just about getting the job done. It was about the consequences of failure. And those consequences weren't something she could ignore. She had already stepped into a world where there was no going back. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice more confident than she felt. Vincent's eyes softened slightly, a rare hint of something human behind the cold exterior. "Good. I'm glad to hear that." He paused for a moment before continuing. "Tomorrow, you'll accompany me to a meeting. There's someone I need you to observe, someone who may be a threat to everything we've built." Michelle's stomach dropped. A meeting? A threat? She had only just begun to understand this world, and now she was being thrust deeper into it. "Who is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Someone who thinks they can outsmart me, but they haven't met you yet." There was a coldness in his voice that sent a chill through her. The stakes were higher than she had imagined. She wasn't just working for Vincent now. She was part of his operations, a piece in his chess game. And tomorrow, she would see just how dangerous this world really was. As Vincent turned to leave, he paused at the door, looking back at her. "You'll be fine, Michelle. Just remember, always stay 2 steps ahead." His words hung in the air, and Michelle felt a shiver run down her spine. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life had changed. She wasn't the same person who had walked into this office just a few days ago. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back now. Tomorrow, she would face the next test, and she would have to prove that she belonged in this world. The world of the Mafia. The following day, Michelle found herself in a different world entirely. The meeting that Vincent had mentioned was at a private, high-end restaurant, a place that even the wealthiest clients could barely get a reservation at. As she stepped out of the car, the cold wind nipped at her skin, and she felt a pang of unease. This was it, the moment where she would see the full extent of what she had signed up for. She tried to steady her breath, telling herself that she could handle this. Vincent had given her the chance to prove herself, and she wasn't going to back down now. Vincent's car pulled up beside hers, and as he stepped out, he was immediately surrounded by his usual entourage of bodyguards. The man moved with an air of authority, like a predator among prey. His eyes flicked over to Michelle, who stood at the entrance, unsure whether to follow or wait for further instructions. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice low, yet carrying the weight of command. She nodded, keeping her distance, but ready to follow his every move. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The lights were dim, casting shadows over the long, polished wooden tables. There were only a few patrons, mostly silent and focused on their own business. At one of the back tables, sitting alone, was a man with a smug look on his face. He wore an expensive suit, but his confidence made him look almost too comfortable. This was the man Vincent had warned her about, Victor Mallory, a rival businessman who had been making a series of moves that could threaten everything Vincent had built. Vincent didn't waste any time. He walked straight up to the table and greeted Victor with a nod. "Mallory," he said, his tone cold and unwelcoming. "We need to talk." The man looked up slowly, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Romano," he replied, his voice smooth. "It's been a while. I'm surprised you actually showed up. I thought you'd send one of your lackeys to handle this." Vincent didn't flinch. "You're a problem I need to handle personally," he said, his eyes narrowing. "I'm done with your little games." Michelle stayed by Vincent's side, trying to make herself as invisible as possible. She had never been in a situation like this before, surrounded by men who were used to power, to dominance. But her job now was to observe, to learn. She had to keep her wits about her. The conversation between the two men grew tense, their words laced with threats disguised as pleasantries. Mallory leaned forward, his smile still plastered on his face, but there was an unmistakable edge to his voice. "You know, Vincent, I always thought you were smarter than this. You're not the only one who has connections, who can play the game." Vincent's eyes remained fixed on him. "You're out of your depth, Mallory. I've played this game longer than you have, and you're not going to win." The tension between them was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Michelle could feel it, could sense the danger simmering just below the surface. And then, Mallory leaned back, his smirk widening. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "But I'm not here to argue with you today. I'm here to make a deal. You know how it works, Vincent? You scratch my back, I scratch yours." Vincent's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to Michelle. "Take a seat," he instructed her. "Listen, learn. This is how you deal with people like him." Michelle nodded and sat down at the table, her hands clenched in her lap as she tried to maintain her composure. The two men continued their conversation, each one trying to outmaneuver the other, but Vincent was always a step ahead. He didn't give away anything, didn't reveal his hand. It was a game of power, of subtle manipulation. As the minutes passed, Michelle felt herself becoming more immersed in this world that she had only just begun to understand. She was learning how to navigate the complex dynamics between power and loyalty, between threats and promises. But she was also starting to see the darker side of the business. The world that Vincent inhabited wasn't just about money or influence. It was about survival. As the meeting dragged on, Michelle's mind raced. She had never considered what it would be like to live in such a high-stakes environment. The decisions made here didn't just affect a few people, they affected everything. And as she looked at Vincent, watching him hold his ground with Mallory, she realized just how much she had to learn. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Vincent stood up, his hand firmly shaking Mallory's in a deal that wasn't really a deal at all. "We're done here," Vincent said, his tone final. But remember this, Mallory. Cross me again, and I won't be so kind. With that, he turned and walked out of the room, Michelle following closely behind. As they exited the restaurant, Vincent's bodyguards moved in around them, ensuring that nothing would go wrong. Michelle could feel the weight of the night's events pressing down on her, but she also felt something else, a sense of pride. She had made it through the meeting without flinching, without backing down. And as Vincent's car pulled away from the restaurant, she realized that this was only the beginning. She was in deeper now, part of a world that was dangerous, powerful, and unpredictable. But it was also the world she had chosen to be a part of, and she was determined to prove that she could handle it. The following days were a blur for Michelle. She had barely processed what happened in the meeting with Victor Mallory when she was thrown into another high-stakes situation. Vincent kept her close, involving her in more tasks that were both daunting and exhilarating. Every day, she walked further into his world, a world that grew more complex and dangerous with each passing moment. The power dynamics, the quiet threats, and the subtle manipulations, it was all becoming second nature to her. But it was also starting to take a toll. The constant tension in the air, the whispers behind closed doors, the way Vincent's eyes would narrow when someone wronged him. Michelle couldn't deny that it was all intoxicating. She was starting to see the world through a different lens. One evening, as she was organizing some files in the office, Vincent walked in. His presence was always commanding, but tonight, there was something else in the air, something heavier. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stood by the door, watching her for a moment before he finally broke the silence. "I need you to go to a meeting tomorrow," he said, his voice low and serious. Michelle's heart skipped a beat. A meeting? She hadn't been to one since the encounter with Mallory. She had learned a lot from that meeting, but she wasn't sure she was ready for another one. "Who is it with?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Vincent walked over to the desk, pulling a folder from his briefcase and laying it in front of her. "It's with a supplier. We need to make sure they keep their end of the deal. But there's more to it than that." His words were deliberate, almost too measured. Michelle's curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Vincent's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something, concern, perhaps, or maybe a warning. "There's been a breach," he said, his tone darkening. "Someone's been taking advantage of our trust. I need you to find out who." The weight of his words hit her. This wasn't just a typical business meeting. It was a test of her loyalty, her instincts, and her ability to navigate this dangerous world. She knew that Vincent wasn't just asking her to attend a meeting. He was asking her to prove herself. "I'll handle it," she said, her voice steady, though inside, her heart raced. Vincent nodded. "I know you will. But remember, trust no one." His words lingered in the air, and Michelle felt the weight of them. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was involved in something far bigger than herself. The next day, Michelle found herself walking into a high-rise building, the sleek, polished exterior a far cry from the simple life she had once known. The meeting was set for the top floor, where a lavish office awaited her. She had no idea what to expect, but she was ready. As she stepped into the elevator, she could feel the familiar anxiety creeping in, but she quickly squashed it. She was no longer the woman who had walked into Vincent's world with uncertainty. She had learned to adapt, to keep her wits about her. The elevator doors opened, and Michelle stepped into the lobby of the office. It was quiet, almost eerily so. A receptionist greeted her with a polite smile before directing her to a large conference room. As she entered, she saw the supplier sitting at the table, an older man with sharp features and an air of arrogance about him. He didn't even look up as she approached. "You must be the new assistant," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Vincent sent you, I presume." Michelle nodded, trying to keep her expression neutral. "I'm here to discuss the terms of our agreement," she said, her voice calm but firm. The man finally looked up, his eyes scanning her with a critical gaze. "I don't take orders from women, especially not someone who's clearly out of her depth," he sneered. Michelle felt a surge of anger rise within her, but she kept her composure. She knew she couldn't let him see how much his words affected her. "You'll take orders from me," she said coolly, "because you owe Vincent your business. And I'm here to make sure you honor that deal." The man's eyes flashed with irritation, but he said nothing. Instead, he motioned for her to sit. As she took her seat across from him, Michelle kept her posture straight, her mind racing. She had to be careful. One wrong move, and she could lose Vincent's trust. The meeting was tense, with the supplier making excuses and trying to shift blame onto others. But Michelle was sharp. She kept her questions focused, her observations keen. She could see the cracks in his story, the way he shifted in his seat when certain topics were brought up. And when he tried to downplay the breach in the agreement, Michelle called him out. "You're lying," she said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. The supplier's face reddened, and for a moment, Michelle saw the fear behind his arrogance. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice faltering. "I know what you've been doing," Michelle replied, leaning forward. "I know you've been skimming off the top, and I know you've been using Vincent's name to cover it up. But that stops now." The supplier's face twisted with anger, but Michelle wasn't done. "You'll do what's right, or I'll make sure everyone knows what you've been doing behind Vincent's back." The threat hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was silent. The supplier finally broke, his posture slumping. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll make things right. Just don't tell him." Michelle stood, her heart pounding. She had done it. She had gained the upper hand in the meeting and ensured that the deal would go through as planned. As she walked out of the office, she felt a surge of confidence. She was proving herself, one step at a time. And as the elevator doors closed, she realized that this was only the beginning. She was no longer just a maid in Vincent's world. She was a player in it, too. Michelle had never felt more alive, and yet, more in over her head. After the meeting with the supplier, she thought things would settle down, but they didn't. Each day in Vincent's world felt like a new test, a new challenge. Every time she thought she had a grasp on the rules, something shifted. She had made it through the supplier confrontation, but now she was about to face something even more dangerous, something that could change everything. It was late one afternoon when Vincent called her into his office. She had just finished organizing a new set of files and was preparing to head out for the day when his voice crackled through her phone. "I need you here," he said, his tone firm, with just a hint of urgency. She dropped everything and headed to his office, her mind racing with possibilities. What had happened now? When she arrived, Vincent was already at his desk, looking over several papers. His face was hard to read, his usual calm expression replaced by a slight tension. He looked up as she entered. "Michelle," he said, motioning for her to take a seat. "Sit down. We need to talk." She sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. "What was this about?" "There's a problem," Vincent continued, his voice steady. "Someone inside my operation has been leaking information. I've had a few key pieces of intel go missing, and I suspect there's a mole among us." Michelle's heart skipped a beat. A mole? In Vincent's inner circle? The idea was almost unthinkable. She couldn't imagine anyone close to him betraying him. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent looked at her for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to share the full extent of the situation. Finally, he spoke. "I need you to find out who it is. You've been close to a lot of the staff lately. You've been able to gain their trust." He paused. "I need you to watch them. Find out who's been acting suspiciously." Michelle nodded, her mind already working through the logistics. This was different from anything she had done before. This wasn't about business deals or negotiations. This was about betrayal, about trust being broken in the most dangerous way possible. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the swirl of nerves inside her. Vincent's eyes softened slightly. "Good. You're not in this alone. But I need you to be careful. People will try to manipulate you. They'll try to get close, to make you doubt your instincts. Don't let them." The words were like a weight in her chest. He was right. Michelle had seen firsthand how easily people in Vincent's world could turn on each other. The pressure to choose sides, to align with the right people, was always looming. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll keep my eyes open." The next few days were a blur of watching, listening, and trying to piece together the small details that didn't add up. She spent hours in the office, her eyes scanning the faces of everyone who worked under Vincent. She studied their body language, their interactions with each other, and their reactions to Vincent's commands. No one stood out. But Michelle had learned something in her short time working with Vincent. Nothing was ever as it seemed. One evening, as she was leaving the office, she ran into one of the junior staff members. His name was Jared, a young man who had been working for Vincent for only a few months. He was quiet, always in the background, and seemed harmless enough. but there was something in his eyes that Michelle couldn't shake. As she walked past him, he smiled nervously, but his gaze lingered on her just a moment too long. She didn't think much of it at first, but later that night, as she sat in her apartment, something about that encounter gnawed at her. It wasn't just his look. It was the way he seemed to be watching her, like he knew more than he should. The next day, Michelle decided to keep an eye on Jared. She followed him discreetly as he left the office for lunch. He made a stop at a nearby coffee shop, then headed down the street to a small, rundown building that looked completely out of place in the heart of the city's bustling business district. Michelle watched from a distance as Jared disappeared inside. Her heart began to race. Was this the lead she had been waiting for? Was Jared the mole? She waited for several minutes, her mind racing with questions. Then, without thinking, she made her move. She crossed the street and approached the building. She couldn't help herself. Her instincts told her something was off, and she had to find out what it was. She slipped inside, careful not to be seen. The building was dark and smelled musty, with the sound of footsteps echoing down the narrow hallways. She followed the sounds, heart pounding in her chest. As she rounded a corner, she froze. Jared was standing at the end of the hallway, talking to a man Michelle had never seen before. The man was tall, with a stern expression and dark clothing. They were talking in hushed tones, but Michelle could still make out a few words. "Too risky, can't wait much longer," Jared was saying. "Vincent will find out," the man replied. Michelle's stomach dropped. It was clear now. Jared was involved in something much bigger than she had realized. She couldn't hear the rest of the conversation, but she didn't need to. She had enough to know that Jared was a part of something dangerous, something that could bring Vincent's entire operation crashing down. She turned to leave, but just as she was about to slip back into the hallway, Jared turned and locked eyes with her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Michelle's heart raced as she realized that he knew. She had overheard. But instead of confrontation, Jared simply gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging her discovery. Without a word, he turned and walked away. Michelle stood there, frozen, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just uncovered. She had found the mole, but now she had to decide what to do with the information. The game had just become even more dangerous. Michelle stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. Jared had seen her. The look he gave her wasn't one of surprise or anger, but a cold acknowledgement, as if he knew she had uncovered something she wasn't supposed to know. For a split second, they locked eyes, and Michelle felt a chill run down her spine. Then, without a word, Jared turned and disappeared down the dark hallway, leaving Michelle standing there, alone and uncertain. She didn't know what to do next. The fact that Jared hadn't confronted her, hadn't called her out, felt more ominous than anything. He had acknowledged her discovery, and that meant he knew exactly what she had overheard. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make a clear picture. Michelle's mind raced as she made her way back to the office, her thoughts consumed with what she had learned. Jared was the mole. That much was clear. But why had he been acting so strangely? And what did that conversation mean for Vincent's operation? She had to tell Vincent. But how? She wasn't sure she could trust anyone now. She couldn't risk it. As she walked into the office, her eyes met Vincent's. He had been watching her, waiting for her to return. "You're back," he said, his voice casual, but there was something in his eyes, an expectation. Michelle didn't say anything at first. She could feel the weight of what she knew pressing on her. She wasn't sure how to explain what had happened without giving too much away. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but filled with tension. "I found something," she said quietly. Vincent's eyes sharpened, and he stood up, walking toward her. "What did you find?" Michelle hesitated for a moment. She needed to be careful. If Jared was the mole, she didn't want to reveal everything too soon. But Vincent had to know. She had no other choice. "Jared," she said softly. "He's been talking to someone. Someone I don't know. They're making deals behind your back." Vincent's expression darkened. He didn't speak for a moment, as if processing the information. Michelle could see the wheels turning in his head. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "I knew something was off," he said quietly. "Jared's been acting strange lately, but I never suspected he was involved in something like this." Michelle felt a flicker of relief. At least Vincent wasn't dismissing what she had uncovered. But the tension in the room remained, heavy and suffocating. "What do we do now?" Michelle asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent didn't hesitate. "We deal with it," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "I'm not going to let anyone undermine me. Not someone I've trusted. Not anyone." Michelle nodded, but a part of her was still unsure. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about loyalty, betrayal, and survival. And Michelle was in deeper than she ever expected. Vincent's eyes fixed on her. "I need you to stay alert," he continued. "You've already proven you can handle things, but this is different. If Jared is the mole, he's dangerous. He's in too deep, and we don't know who else he's working with. I need you to keep watching him. I need you to make sure he doesn't slip through the cracks." Michelle swallowed hard. The responsibility weighed on her. She wasn't just Vincent's assistant anymore. She was a part of his inner circle, and with that came a whole new set of risks. But she also knew that she couldn't back down now. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Vincent gave her a nod of approval. "I know you will," he said. "And when the time comes, we'll deal with him. But for now, we wait. We watch." The days that followed were filled with tension. Michelle kept a close eye on Jared, tracking his every move, listening for any slip-ups. Every time he spoke, every time he left the office, she wondered if he was making a deal, planning something. But he was good at hiding it. Too good. The more she watched, the more she realized how deeply Jared had been involved in Vincent's operation. He knew things. He had access to things. And the fact that he had been able to deceive Vincent for so long made her uneasy. She wasn't sure how much she could trust what she saw, but she couldn't afford to ignore it. One evening, a week after the conversation she had overheard, Michelle decided to confront Jared. She had no choice. She couldn't keep watching him from the shadows. She had to know the truth. It was late when she found him, sitting alone at the bar near the back of the office building. The dim lights cast shadows over his face as he looked up at her, a knowing look in his eyes. "You've been watching me," he said softly. Michelle didn't answer. She stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, unsure of what to say next. "I know what you're doing, Jared," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "I know about the deals you've been making. I know you're working with someone else. And I know you've been leaking information." Jared didn't flinch. Instead, he just smiled, a cold, empty smile. "You don't know everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you're getting close." The words hung in the air, and Michelle's pulse quickened. What did that mean? Who was he working with? What did he mean by getting close? Before she could ask another question, Jared stood up, his eyes still locked on hers. "You should have stayed out of it," he said softly, before walking away. Michelle stood there for a moment, her mind racing. What had just happened? What did Jared mean by that? The game had changed, and she was no longer sure of the rules. Michelle's mind raced as she left the bar that night. Jared's cryptic words echoed in her head, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something far bigger than herself. His cold smile, the way he had walked away without another word, it left her feeling unsettled. She had thought she was in control, but now she wasn't so sure. Who was Jared really working for? What had he meant by getting close? The questions gnawed at her, and she knew she couldn't ignore them. She had already come too far, and there was no turning back now. As she arrived back at the office the next morning, she found Vincent already there, poring over some papers. His sharp eyes flicked up as she entered. "You're here early," he observed, his tone casual, but there was an underlying tension in his voice. Michelle took a deep breath before speaking. "I think I know who's behind the leaks," she said, trying to steady her nerves. Vincent looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Who?" he asked, his voice low. She hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "It's Jared," she said finally. "I've been watching him. He's been making deals behind your back, Vincent. I overheard part of a conversation. He's involved with someone else. I think he's been leaking information." Vincent's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Michelle saw a flicker of something darker in his gaze. "Jared," he repeated, his voice filled with contempt. "I should have seen it sooner. He's been acting strange for weeks." Michelle felt a pang of unease. She had suspected Jared for some time, but hearing Vincent confirm it made everything feel more real. The situation had escalated, and she was now a part of something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "What do we do now?" Michelle asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's expression hardened. "We deal with it," he said simply, his voice full of authority. "Jared has crossed the line. And anyone who betrays me doesn't get to walk away. Michelle nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. This was more than just a business issue. It was personal. She could see the anger in Vincent's eyes, and she knew he wasn't one to let betrayal slide. I'll handle it, she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced with anticipation. The next few hours felt like an eternity. Vincent kept Michelle close, preparing for the confrontation. She had seen his calm demeanor before, but today there was something different in his eyes, something sharper, more focused. He wasn't just preparing for a business transaction. He was preparing for a fight. When we confront him, I want you to stay close, Vincent said, his voice firm. This is your test. I need to know you can handle it. Michelle nodded, trying to suppress the growing anxiety in her chest. She had come this far, but now she had to prove herself once again. The meeting was set for the evening. Michelle and Vincent arrived at a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was a quiet, isolated place, perfect for a private conversation. The air was thick with tension as they waited. Vincent's bodyguards flanked them, their expressions as unreadable as always. When Jared finally arrived, he looked uneasy, but his bravado was still there, as if he thought he could talk his way out of whatever was coming. As he walked toward them, his eyes flicked nervously between Vincent and Michelle. You wanted to see me? He asked, trying to sound casual, but Michelle could hear the tremor in his voice. Vincent didn't waste any time. You've been leaking information, Jared, he said coldly. You've been betraying my trust. And for that, you'll pay. Jared's face paled. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Vincent stepped forward, his gaze unyielding. You've been working with someone else, haven't you? Someone I don't know. And now you've put everything at risk. Jared swallowed hard, his hands trembling. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he muttered, his voice barely audible. I was just trying to survive. You don't understand what it's like. Vincent's eyes narrowed further, and for a moment, Michelle thought she saw a flicker of sympathy in his gaze. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. I don't care about your excuses, Vincent said, his voice low and dangerous. You've betrayed me, and that's something I can't forgive. Jared stepped back, his eyes wild with panic. Please, Vincent, I'll fix it. I'll make it right. I never meant to hurt you. Michelle watched the exchange carefully. She had seen this before. People begging for forgiveness, trying to squirm their way out of trouble. But Vincent wasn't the type to give second chances. It's too late for that, Vincent said, his voice steely. You've made your choice, and now you'll face the consequences. He turned to one of his bodyguards. Take him, he ordered. The bodyguard nodded and stepped forward, grabbing Jared by the arm and pulling him away. Jared struggled, but there was no escape. As he was dragged away, he looked back at Michelle, his eyes pleading. Please, he begged. You don't have to do this. You know what they'll do to me. I never wanted this. Michelle felt a pang of guilt, but she quickly suppressed it. She knew she had made the right choice. She had to stay loyal to Vincent, even if it meant watching someone else suffer. As the car pulled away, Michelle looked at Vincent. Is it over now? She asked, her voice soft. Vincent nodded, his expression unreadable. For now, he said, his voice firm. But don't forget, Michelle. In this world, there's always someone waiting for you to slip up. And you can never trust anyone completely. Michelle nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The world she had stepped into was dangerous, and the stakes were higher than ever. But as she looked at Vincent, she realized that this was where she belonged. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back now. The days after Jared's removal were quieter than Michelle expected, but the air in Vincent's office was thick with an unspoken tension. Despite the victory, despite the mole being dealt with, there was a lingering sense of unease that Michelle couldn't shake. Vincent had handled it swiftly and decisively, but she knew this world, this life she had stepped into, was always one step away from chaos. As she sat at her desk, organizing some files, she tried to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting back to that night in the warehouse, to the look in Jared's eyes as he was dragged away. She had felt a brief moment of sympathy for him, but she quickly pushed it aside. Sympathy didn't have a place here. It couldn't. Vincent had made that clear from the beginning. Loyalty was everything. The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts, and she looked up to see Vincent standing in the doorway. He looked as calm as ever, but there was something different in the way he regarded her. Something more personal. We need to talk, he said, his voice smooth but carrying an undeniable weight. Michelle stood, her heart quickening. What about? She asked, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. Vincent didn't answer right away. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The gesture felt deliberate, as if they were about to have a conversation that no one else could hear. I've been thinking, he began, his eyes locking with hers. You've done well so far. You've proven yourself in ways that others never could. The words caught her off guard. She had expected him to be more distant, more guarded, but he was looking at her with something else now, something that made her pulse race. You've done more than just follow orders, Michelle. You've stepped up, and I respect that, he continued, his voice low. Michelle felt a warmth spread through her, but she kept her expression neutral. This was Vincent Romano, a Mafia boss, not a man to be taken lightly. I appreciate that, she said quietly. But what's next? What do you want from me now? Vincent's lips curled into a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I want you to understand something, he said, his tone serious. You're not just a part of this operation now. You're a key player. People will try to manipulate you, use you. I need to know you'll stay loyal, that you'll always choose the right side. His words hung in the air, heavy and full of meaning. Michelle swallowed hard. Loyalty was everything in Vincent's world, and she knew it. But loyalty came with a cost. She had already sacrificed her peace of mind, her sense of safety. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And she knew, deep down, that she was in deeper than she had ever planned. I'm loyal to you, she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. You know that. Vincent studied her for a long moment, his gaze searching. Then, he nodded slowly. I believe you, he said. But I need more. I need to know that you can handle what's coming next. Michelle felt a chill run down her spine. What was he talking about? What was coming next? She opened her mouth to ask, but Vincent held up a hand, stopping her. There's a situation, he said, his voice cold. A rival group has been making moves in our territory. They've been testing us, trying to undermine everything we've built. And it's time to send a message. The words hit her like a punch. A rival group? Under Vincent's rule, no one dared to encroach on his territory without consequences. This wasn't just a business problem, it was a war. And Michelle was about to be thrown into the middle of it. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's eyes darkened. I need you to be the one to deliver the message, he said. Michelle's heart skipped a beat. Me? She asked, her voice thick with disbelief. But I'm not. You've already proven you can handle yourself. Vincent interrupted, his voice unwavering. You're not just a maid anymore, Michelle. You're a part of this operation, and I'm trusting you to do what's necessary. His words were like a command, a challenge she couldn't refuse. The gravity of the situation settled over her like a heavy cloak. She had come this far, but now she was being asked to take a step that would change everything. She wasn't just going to be an observer anymore. She was going to be an active participant in Vincent's world. And that world was dangerous. I understand, she said quietly, though her mind was spinning. What do I need to do? Vincent walked over to the desk, opening a drawer and pulling out a small envelope. He slid it across the table to her. Take this to the leader of the rival group, he said. Make sure they understand who they're dealing with. Don't be afraid to show them what happens when you cross me. Michelle took the envelope, feeling its weight in her hands. This was no longer about business deals or quiet negotiations. This was about power, control, and survival. She was about to walk into a world she wasn't sure she was ready for. But she had no choice now. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady despite the fear she felt gnawing at her. Vincent nodded, his gaze softening just slightly. I know you will, he said. And when this is over, you'll have earned your place in this world. Michelle didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She already knew that once she stepped into this next phase of Vincent's world, there would be no turning back. The stakes were higher than ever, and Michelle was now a part of a game that could cost her everything. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Michelle stood in front of the small, nondescript building, her heart racing in her chest. This was the place, the rival group's headquarters. She had been given a simple task, but she knew nothing in Vincent's world was ever that simple. The envelope he had given her felt heavier with each step she took toward the entrance. She could already feel the weight of the message she was about to deliver pressing on her shoulders. The building was tucked away on a quiet street, its windows dark, its presence understated. A perfect hiding place for people who thrived in the shadows. Michelle took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. The decision she had made to step into this world wasn't just about loyalty anymore. It was about survival. Vincent's words echoed in her mind. Don't be afraid to show them what happens when you cross me. She knew exactly what he meant. She was no longer just a pawn. She had become part of something far bigger, and there was no turning back. As she reached the door, she hesitated for a moment. Her instincts told her to turn back, to walk away, but she ignored them. She had made her choice. She was already in too deep. The door creaked open as she pushed it, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The air inside smelled musty, with the faint scent of cigarette smoke lingering in the corners. She moved cautiously, her eyes scanning the area, her every step measured and deliberate. The hallway opened into a larger room, where several men sat around a table, talking quietly. They stopped when they saw her, their eyes narrowing as they sized her up. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, stood up and walked toward her. "What do we have here?" he asked, his voice rough. "Who sent you?" Michelle stood her ground, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm here to deliver a message," she said, her voice steady. "From Vincent Romano." The man's eyes flickered with recognition, and for a brief moment, Michelle saw a flash of fear behind his tough exterior. "Romano's people?" he muttered under his breath, as if trying to process the situation. "What message?" Michelle stepped forward, holding the envelope out to him. "Vincent said you've been testing him. He doesn't take kindly to people who challenge him," she said, her tone calm, but filled with an edge. The man stared at the envelope for a moment before taking it from her. He tore it open quickly, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled out the letter inside. As he read, the room fell silent. The other men watched him, waiting for his reaction. Michelle stood still, watching him closely. She had to admit, the power she felt in this moment was intoxicating. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was the one delivering the message. The man looked up from the letter, his face pale. This is a threat," he said, his voice hoarse. "Romano doesn't play games, does he?" Michelle didn't answer. She didn't need to. "You're going to regret this," the man spat, his eyes flashing with anger. He turned to the others, who had begun to murmur among themselves. "Get her," he shouted, signaling to the men around him. But as they moved toward her, something inside Michelle shifted. The fear that had been gnawing at her for days, the doubt, the uncertainty, everything fell away. She wasn't just a pawn in this game anymore. She was a player. She was Vincent's player. As the men reached for her, Michelle moved swiftly, her body trained by weeks of tension and vigilance. She dodged the first man, stepping to the side and slamming her elbow into his gut. He gasped, stumbling back. The other two lunged at her, but she was already moving, her movements sharp and precise. She kicked one in the chest, sending him sprawling to the floor. The remaining man hesitated for a second, his eyes narrowing as he watched her. "You think you can take me on?" he growled. Michelle didn't waste any time. She stepped forward, her fist connecting with his jaw in a quick, powerful strike. He went down with a grunt, crumpling to the floor in a heap. The room was silent for a moment as Michelle stood over the fallen men, her chest rising and falling with exertion. She wiped the sweat from her brow, her heart pounding in her ears. She had done it. She had sent the message. And now, there was no turning back. The man with the scar slowly stood up, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had underestimated her, and he knew it. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "You've just made things worse." Michelle didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked out of the room, the sound of her footsteps echoing down the hallway. She had delivered the message. She had proved herself. As she stepped out into the night air, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. But that relief was short-lived. Vincent's world was dangerous, and she was now a part of it. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The game was far from over. But for the first time, Michelle knew that she wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. Michelle walked through the quiet streets of the city, her mind still reeling from the confrontation. The night air was cool, but it did nothing to quell the heat rising in her chest. She had done what Vincent asked. She had delivered the message. But the faces of the men she had fought still lingered in her mind. She had proven herself, but she was beginning to realize just how deep she was in now. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Her thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Vincent. "Meet me at the usual place. We need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if it was excitement or fear, but she knew one thing for sure. Vincent didn't call unless something important was about to happen. She took a deep breath and made her way to the location. It was an upscale bar Vincent frequented, hidden away from the prying eyes of the public. The moment she stepped inside, the familiar scent of expensive whiskey and cigar smoke hit her. She knew that Vincent would be in the back booth, surrounded by his usual security, his demeanor always calm, but with an underlying tension. As she approached the booth, she noticed that Vincent was alone, his dark eyes scanning the room. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "You're late," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of amusement. "I wasn't sure if you were going to show up after what happened." Michelle took a seat across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I did what you asked," she said, her voice steady. "I delivered the message. They won't be a problem anymore." Vincent leaned back in the booth, his eyes studying her carefully. "I know," he said, his voice low. "But it's not about sending a message. It's about proving that you can handle this world. And you did. You showed me something tonight." Michelle felt a shiver run down her spine. She wasn't sure if it was because of his words or the weight of the responsibility that now hung over her. Vincent didn't offer compliments lightly. "I can handle this," she said, meeting his gaze. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." Vincent's expression softened for a moment, but it was gone in an instant. He wasn't the type of man to show weakness. "There's always more, Michelle," he said, his voice firm. "And you've only just begun." He paused, as if considering something. "I need you to keep an eye on something for me. I have a few people who have been trying to get close to me. People I don't trust. I need to know who's behind it." Michelle nodded. "I'll do it," she said. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. Vincent leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "It's not just about loyalty, Michelle. It's about survival. You've seen what happens when people get too comfortable. People get careless. And when they do, they fall." His words hung in the air, and Michelle felt the weight of them settle on her shoulders. She wasn't just working for Vincent anymore. She was in his world, a world where every decision mattered, where every misstep could be fatal. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "I'll watch them. I won't let anyone get close to you." Vincent studied her for a moment before nodding. "Good," he said, his voice softening. "I knew I made the right choice with you." The words were simple, but they carried more weight than she expected. Michelle felt a flicker of pride, but it quickly faded as she remembered just how dangerous this world was. She was playing a game with rules she didn't fully understand, and the stakes were higher than she could have imagined. Vincent stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "I'll be in touch," he said. "Keep your eyes open, and don't let anyone get too close." Michelle stood, her body tense as she followed him out of the bar. As they walked through the dimly lit streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond her reach. The danger was always there, waiting, and no matter how much she had proven herself, she knew she could never be fully safe. Vincent's world was unforgiving, and for Michelle, it was a world she couldn't escape, no matter how hard she tried. As they parted ways, Vincent gave her a final glance, his eyes cold but calculating. "You're not like the others," he said, his voice low. "And that's what makes you dangerous." Michelle watched him disappear into the shadows, his words echoing in her mind. She was dangerous, but she wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. Michelle had spent the past few weeks working tirelessly, watching, learning, and making her way deeper into the world Vincent had pulled her into. Every move she made, every decision she took, brought her closer to a place she could never fully escape. She had proven her loyalty time and time again, but now, as she stood in Vincent's office, facing him after what seemed like the longest stretch of her life, she realized that there was still so much she didn't know. Vincent looked at her across the desk, his eyes cold, unreadable. The usual calm, unflappable Vincent Romano was there, but there was something more, something different in his gaze. "You've done well," he said, his voice steady. "You've earned your place." Michelle held his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "What comes next?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's lips curved into the smallest of smiles, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Next, you continue proving yourself. You continue to watch, to learn, and to make the right decisions. But be aware, Michelle, he paused, his eyes hardening. It's not about proving yourself to me anymore. It's about survival. In this world, one wrong move, one misstep, and you could be done. Michelle felt a chill settle over her, but she didn't flinch. She had known this world was dangerous from the beginning, but hearing it from Vincent himself brought everything into sharp focus. Survival. That was all that mattered. She was no longer just a bystander. She was part of something bigger, something dark and powerful, and that came with its own set of rules. I understand, she said, her voice steady. I'll do what it takes. Vincent nodded, seeming satisfied with her response. Good. Because what's coming next will test you in ways you can't even imagine. He stood, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. I'm trusting you with something important now, he continued, his voice quieter. You've earned that trust, but don't let me down. I have enemies, Michelle, and they'll stop at nothing to destroy me. If they get to you, they'll get to me. The weight of his words hit her like a freight train. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about power, control, and the constant threat of those who would do anything to take it away from Vincent. And now, Michelle was a part of that. I won't let you down, she said firmly. Vincent looked at her for a moment longer, then nodded. Good. You'll be going with me to a meeting in a few days. This isn't just any meeting. It's with people who've been trying to get closer to me. I need you to be ready. I'm not sure who's going to show up, but I know it won't be peaceful. Michelle's stomach tightened at his words. She had faced danger before, but this felt different. There was a sense of finality in Vincent's tone, as if this meeting could be the turning point for everything. I'm ready, she said, more to herself than to him. We'll leave tomorrow, Vincent said, his voice once again calm, the edge of danger that had been present moments before slipping back into its usual, controlled demeanor. Get some rest. You'll need it. Michelle nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the calm before the storm was about to break. The next day arrived faster than she expected, and as she dressed in her best clothes, her mind raced with the possibilities of what lay ahead. Vincent had told her to be ready for anything, and she had learned over the past months that he didn't give warnings lightly. As they arrived at the meeting location, Michelle's pulse quickened. The place was hidden away in the industrial part of town, a nondescript building that looked like any other. But she knew better. This wasn't just a simple meeting. It was a battleground. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with a long table at the center, surrounded by men and women in suits who all seemed to be sizing each other up. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut through. Vincent stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding the room, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Michelle stood behind him, keeping a low profile, but her eyes were scanning the room. She could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on her, as if they were trying to figure out who she was, what she was capable of. You know why we're here, Vincent said, his voice firm, cutting through the tension in the room. Let's get this over with. The group around the table exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. The conversation began, but Michelle could barely focus on the words being exchanged. She was too aware of the underlying danger, the subtle power plays happening around her. Vincent's world was one of constant calculation, where every word, every gesture mattered. She could see now how easily everything could fall apart if anyone made a wrong move. The meeting dragged on, with deals being made and threats being whispered. Michelle stayed silent, watching, listening, absorbing everything. As the conversation reached its peak, Vincent stood and signaled to her. It was time. The deal had been made, the lines had been drawn, and now they had to leave. As they walked out of the room, Michelle could feel the weight of what had just transpired. She had made it through another test, but she knew that there was always more. This world, Vincent's world, would never stop demanding more from her. She was no longer just a maid, no longer just a bystander. She was part of something dangerous, something powerful. And in this world, survival was all that mattered. In the world of romance stories, where power and loyalty intertwine, Michelle's journey unfolds through unexpected twists, tense encounters, and a growing sense of danger. As she navigates the world of a mafia boss, Vincent, she faces betrayal, danger, and her own fears, all while proving her worth in the shadowy underworld. Romance stories like this draw readers into a world where trust is fragile and loyalty is tested. Michelle's path is fraught with tension as she works her way deeper into Vincent's dangerous world, where every decision she makes could change the course of her life. From intimate moments to high-stakes confrontations, Michelle learns what it truly means to be part of a power structure built on both affection and fear. In this realm of intrigue and temptation, romance stories explore the complexity of relationships where trust, love, and betrayal are the ultimate tests. As Michelle proves herself through courage and determination, she must navigate the fine line between being a pawn in someone else's game and taking control of her own destiny. Will she be able to survive in a world that demands so much from her, or will she crumble under the weight of the secrets she uncovers? Romance stories like this one keep readers on the edge, making them question how far loyalty can go and what sacrifices are worth making for the ones they love.